Today we are going to start out by looking at ecosystems. We will identify the relationships among organisms within populations, communities, ecosystems, and biomes. Describe how those organisms are influenced by particular combinations of biotic or living items and abiotic, non-living factors within the environment. You might recall a food pyramid from biology. Here's an example of a food pyramid. Think of the light source coming in to the primary producers. Those are the plants that grow. Then the primary consumers are those bugs and rodents that eat the plants. The secondary consumers are the animals that eat the primary consumers. The tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers, and then the predators are at the top of the food pyramid. Remember the 10% rule, that calories are decreased by 10% as the food is consumed from each level. Let's review the trophic categories. Autotrophs are an organism that is able to form nutritional organic substances from simple inorganic substances such as carbon dioxide. They're also referred to as producers. Green plants, algae, and bacteria are examples. So what is a producer? Most producers are green plants and algae. They contain chlorophyll, a pigment that captures light energy in the process called photosynthesis. They range in size from microscopic to gigantic trees. The majority of the ecosystem is producers. Chemosynthesis is the process which bacteria or some bacteria uses energy in inorganic chemicals to form organic material from CO2 or water. Primary producers produce an organic material through the process of photosynthesis and grow the growth of the producers. Heterotrophs must consume organic material to obtain energy. They're also known as consumers. All animals are herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, or decomposers. Herbivores are the organisms that feed on grass and plants and feed directly on producers, also known as primary consumers. Examples would be elephants, deer, and gazelles. Carnivores consume animals. They are organisms that feed on primary or secondary consumers. They are also known as secondary consumers and sometimes called terrestrial consumers, like wolves and fish. Omnivores are the animals that consume both animals and plants. Examples of this would be bears, lizards, and even humans. Decomposers or detritivores are scavengers. Chemical decomposers eat dead or organic material, such as fungus and bacteria. Consumers are organisms that feed on other organic material for energy. Animals, fungus, most bacteria, they range from size from plankton to blue whales. Subdivided into categories according to their food source, primary consumers or herbivores feed on producers, secondary consumers feed on primary consumers, and so on through the food chain. Remember that only about 10% of the food or energy from the first source is transferred to the second source. Food chains describe where energy and nutrients go as they move from one organism to another. The plants harmlessly absorbing solar energy, the predators or herbivores eating the plants, and these animals being eaten by other predators. The nutrients does not all move up the food chain. Food webs are interconnection of food chains to form a complex web of feeding relationships. Let's take a little closer look at food chains and food webs. What's the difference? What is a food chain? It shows how each living thing gets its food. It always starts with a plant life and ends with an animal. How does the food chain work? The sun is the original source of energy. Plants capture about 1% of the available energy or light energy from the sun, and they produce biomass through the process of photosynthesis. Herbivores consume these plants. Approximately 10% of the plant's biomass is moved into the herbivore. Carnivores eat other animals. They capture and consume about 10% of the energy stored by the herbivores or other animals. This illustration of a grassland shows a simple food chain. You have the producers, the first level consumers, the secondary level consumers, and the third level of consumers. Did you know there are more herbivores than carnivores? Do you know why? In a food chain, energy is passed from one link to another. When an herbivore eats only a fraction, 10% of the energy that it gets from the plant food becomes new body mass. The rest of the energy is lost to waste or used up by the herbivore as it moves. When a carnivore eats another animal, only a portion of the energy, 10%, from the animal is stored in its tissue. In other words, the organism along a food chain passes on much less energy in the form of body mass than they receive. The further along the food chain you go, the less food, and hence energy, remains available. Most food chains have no more than 4 or 5 links. There cannot be too many links in a single food chain because the animals at the end of the chain would not get enough food or energy to stay alive. Most animals are part of more than one food chain and eat more than one kind of food in order to meet their food and energy requirements. These interconnected food chains form a food web. Food webs, a visual map of feeding relations and energy flow showing the path by which energy passes among organisms as they consume one another. When creating a food web, the arrow moves from the organism or plant that is being consumed to the one that is consuming. Flow of energy. For example, for a flower and butterfly scenario, the arrow moves from the flower to the butterfly. Remember, in a food pyramid, only about 10% of what is being consumed is passed on to the consumer. Okay, so how do you find how much energy the next level will get? To find the amount of energy available for the next trophic level, take the original biomass and divide it by 10%. For example, the flower having energy of 100 kilocalories. A rabbit, the primary consumer at this level, has the opportunity to gain only about 10% of the energy from the flower. To figure how much this would be, take 10 kilocalories divided by 10%. It equals 10 kilocalories. If a snake eats the rabbit, 10 divided by 10 would equal 1. Let's review the trophic levels. Autotrophs make their own food. They're known as producers, plants that receive initial energy from the sun. Heterotrophs cannot make their own food. They are primary consumers, organisms that feed on producers. Secondary consumers are organisms that feed on primary consumers. And decomposers are organisms that feed off of dead stuff. When you think of energy flow and efficiency or inefficiency, herbivores can only consume some of the plant. Much of the consumption is burned off as energy.